The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good somewhere in between, if you're kind of in between all of those times. Welcome to the second webinar of Asset Management Awareness Month 2023. My name is Scott Ray. I am your National Vice President for Events and Seminars. Happy to be joining you today. Happy International Women's Day to all of the property professional women and fleet professional women that are joining us today. Happy to have you all on the broadcast. I am coming to you live from a rainy Northern California, San Francisco Bay Area, where we got a little sprinkling last night, and we are going to be getting a little bit more water coming our way starting tomorrow through the weekend. So it's much needed water, but it's a little rainy over here. So again, thank you for joining us today for our second presentation of 5 total over the month of March. I'm happy to be here with you, and I'm happy to have our speaker today. Before I introduce our speaker, I wanted to just touch on a couple items that you may want to utilize during the presentation. First is the Zoom function. So if you notice above our pictures, our photos or our video is above the presentation. If you see that rectangular line there, if you hover above it, it'll turn into a up arrow and down arrow. If you click, you can enlarge our photos. If you pull towards you, or if you push away, it'll make us get smaller and the presentation get larger. So however you would like to view the presentation, that is an option for you. And the second option is the chat or question feature. So if you have a question that comes up throughout Peter's presentation today, please go ahead and place those in the chat. Lisa Williams in the background will be collecting all of your questions, and we'll have questions at the end of the presentation. So again, if you have any questions, pop them in there. We'll get them to Peter at the very end. So with that, I am pleased to welcome in Peter Collins from, he is the founder and CEO of A2B Tracking. He's coming to you live from Rhode Island, and he's here to talk about the importance of automation for property managers. So with that, I will disappear. I will welcome in Peter. Peter, thank you for joining us today, and I'll turn everything over to you.
Oh, thanks, Scott. And thanks to NPMA for having me today. Really, it's always great to be part of this group and community of professionals in the property space that continue to advance education and the role that you play within your organizations. You know, I've been an NPMA member for 19 years now. It's hard to believe, but getting up there in the number of years, and I can't stress enough the importance of this association. In fact, actually, I was just reaching sort of blindly into my travel mug collection when I was leaving the house for my cup of coffee this morning, and I pulled out this one, which here we go. That's the 2018 SES. Shout out to the Harbor Lights chapter. So, that shows, here we go, pre-pandemic, reference to when we were back in person back in those days. So anyway, always great to be part of this group. Asset Management Awareness Month is also such a great time to learn, and for property professionals to get this time set aside to hone the skills and the knowledge and continue to develop that. Now, anyone who's been to one of my sessions in the recent past, I've focused on the imperative for modern government property management systems. Today's session is without a doubt a deeper dive, but also focused on this key role that automation plays in today's modern government property management systems. So as you all know, that I'm the founder and CEO of A2B Tracking, and we build and install secure cloud-based government property management systems. And I'm here to tell you really what we're seeing in the industry today. So in addition to this growing importance for a complete government property management system, the expectations have changed on us in our property manager roles, property administrator roles, inventory control roles, whatever the case may be. We're asked to move faster with fewer errors and fewer people. And the only way to accomplish this is by taking advantage of technology. And that's what you'll see here today, is I'm giving you a deeper dive into this technology with reference to a few different ways to achieve better automation. Now, I'm going to go back a bit to just reflect on for a moment the impact of fire in our community, what the DoD really needs. And spoiler, in addition to you meeting your contract obligations, it's good data. Also discuss for just a moment DCMA's role in the PMSA as it applies to this topic. And we'll define automation and what that means in this context in the government systems that need this data. We'll also get into automation when it comes to reporting to these government systems. I've even seen most recently some online discussion boards talking about the use of GEX and the use of reporting to PI and these other wide area workflow and the GFP module and what all this means. We'll talk a bit about that today. And we'll also reflect on automation in terms of the use of auto ID technology for organizations that might be at any level of using auto ID, or those that are even processing key functions and data collection, but manually today. So what does automation mean here, and how can that help you? But really what I want to make sure we do is that you leave here today with a clear definition of what an automated GPMS looks like to help you do your jobs better. Okay, so to begin, the directorate. Financial Improvement and Audit Readiness is the directorate that the DoD has set in motion. It's been in motion for over 10 years now. It actually started back in 2011, where the Secretary of Defense at the time put in motion this declaration to say we must achieve a clean audit opinion within the U.S. military, from the Pentagon and throughout. The focus here is to achieve that with financial management by improving the internal controls, resolving material weaknesses, which you'll see come up here in a moment, where we stand on material weaknesses, and advancing the department's fiscal stewardship. Taxpayer dollars, we need to achieve a clean audit opinion as this broad community of those of us that support the U.S. Department of Defense. So the audit readiness really means the DoD property, the plant, equipment, operating material, and supplies, putting the highest priority on accounting controls and accountability for all the mission critical asset information. Really broad sweeping. If you've been tracking this through the DoD Comptroller's office at all, you'll see the continuous updates coming from every branch of the services, DLA, and all the support that has to happen behind the scenes. Now, for 2022, defense audit results are in. Still didn't pass. I don't think anybody was particularly surprised by that, but the journey continues to really. Comptroller Mike McCord today basically said, I'd prefer to see more progress, of course, but we're peeling off the layers. So the DoD has been in the spotlight for the past 5 years. And so, you know, this is a continued journey. Forevermore, we will be, you know, working toward this audit readiness. So another quick update here from the results of 2022, where exactly are the highest priorities going? And so when the DoD identified 8 priority areas across 28 agency-wide material weaknesses, one of those 8 top priorities is government property in possession of contractors. Now, there are other priorities too: real property, inventory, operating material and supplies, specifically the Joint Strike Fighter program, for instance. So there are many more, but you know, here we are looking at one of the 8, and that impacts what we do every day and how we communicate what we do and what we have within our custody to support these contract obligations. So here in this document, this financial report, the components could not substantiate the existence and completeness of government property in possession of contractors. That's the problem statement. Now, since the beginning of this calendar year, here in January, a GAO report was just released. You may have seen it, maybe you didn't, but it goes on to talk about DoD's lack of accountability over government property in possession of contractors, which has been reported by the auditors for decades. But this long-standing issue affects the accounting and reporting of GFP, and is one of the reasons the DoD is unable to produce auditable financial statements. DoD estimates its value of GFP at over $220 billion. And furthermore, I mean, I've heard references to that's a very conservative number. But here's the key, is that as contractors supporting the DoD, you should be paying attention to this, and you need to be positioning yourselves favorably to maintain this level of contract compliance, period. The property management impacts, the need to improve that audit readiness of information that's essential for the management of mission critical assets. You know, here are examples: military equipment, inventory, operating materials and supplies, and general equipment. You know, pretty broad stroking categories. The kind of asset information is unique item identifier information, category and type of assets, the location, status, description, the custody, and the controlling financial reporting entity, to making sure that, you know, it's clear who has that level of responsibility. But when you're gathering this data that's identified by FAR in your contract obligations, and you're flowing it back to these, you know, what we'll largely call this DoD e-commerce platform, which is the PI system. But it's ultimately ending up in these accountable property systems of record, these APSRs. And it's to ensure that these APSRs on the military side can verify the mission critical asset existence and completeness, so that book to floor and floor to book. If you hadn't heard that reference before, it's to make sure that your record keeping matches physically what exists, and then what physically exists are complete back into your record keeping. That's what this whole objective is about. Serially managed assets is clearly a part of this. You know, A to B has been, you know, working also in, you know, providing technology, but also, you know, knowing how key it is to leverage auto ID technologies, where you can apply a barcode to an asset to uniquely serialize it. It is a global unique serialized standard that you're working with here. It's an industry best practice for quickly identifying and marking these key assets. You can virtually put it on just about anything these days. But this is for the end items and for the embedded parts. And really, you got to remember, when you're putting barcodes, for instance, on assets, that you're marking it with a level of durability that lasts the full life cycle of that item, whatever it is that you're marking. The guidebook has another role in all this, because it's the guidebook for government contract property administration, with much better definition to the property management system analysis, which is that systemic objective review and evaluation of a contractor's property management system. So to determine whether it's providing effective and efficient control of government property that's in compliance with these government property clauses and contractual provisions. 120 pages, easy read, I'm sure. It particularly helpful, and maybe if you have some issues getting to bed at night. But it is deep. It's helpful to understand DCMA's perspective and the way that they are, in fact, using this guidebook as a frame of reference to be able to make sure that the government contractors are doing their part. So what a government property management system in the modern day today looks like. Some of you may have heard me say this before, but it's worth reiterating that when you have government property that could be geographically separated in many different locations, you may have an imbalance between how much volume of property you may have in one centralized location and smaller amounts in more disparate locations. The idea is to have a centralized, a common system of record keeping that's accessible from all the locations and that are responsible for both GFP and managing CAP alike. It also needs to be secure today. We know that cybersecurity is a significant topic that also is making its way into all of our contract obligations. And you have a role in that because you're maintaining these records to support all the GFP that you manage. But it's secure, it's data storage that passes all of the CMMC requirements and a lot of times with reference to control unclassified information or higher levels of security to assure that everything is being maintained in a secure stored area. We talk about accessibility and in using a variety of different devices that can keep the record keeping up to date at the point of activity, right? So we're walking around with smartphones, or we might have tablets going out into the field or going into the warehouse to perform life cycle events or updates of our record keeping. So making sure that this system capability of a modern government property management system is accessible to a number of different computing devices that give you the flexibility that you need to do your job where you need it to be done. You might be that you're walking around a warehouse and you need a more industrial mobile computer, or you might be in some remote area where you've got a limited amount and you just need your smartphone to be able to log and catalog this information. Auto ID and data exchange in both automated ways, we'll come back to that. That's the much deeper dive that we're getting into today. And without a doubt, integrated. So the ability to exchange data with other systems that could be government systems or internal ERP systems. But the whole idea here is how do we eliminate that swivel chair or the silos of data and ultimately save significant time from having to re-enter data and avoid making data entry mistakes. One time we worked with a military installation that literally had 3 different databases or 3 different, what they refer to as systems of record that reflected against what inventory they had. None of them were in sync. They were wildly different records with different data sets. And not a single database among the 3 had the right information and could be called a single pot of truth. So what you need to think about to avoid a situation like that is what is the single master data set that represents the truth that you represent and can be audited against. By the way, you'll see here as we get into this automation why it cannot be spreadsheets. A modern government property management system is not spreadsheets because it cannot take advantage of the benefits of automation we're going to talk about and some of the audit ability that we're talking about here. And when we say auditability, remember, our goal here is to help you get to a point of sustained audit readiness. And sustained means not something that you get ready within 2 weeks prior to the arrival of DCMA. It is an ongoing practice so that come time for the auditors to come on site, your record keeping is exactly where it needs to be, it's ready to be reviewed and audited, you know where your equipment is, all of that comes together in a much less stressful point in time. Okay, so let's get into it. Opportunities to automate property management tasks is really what we're going to dive deeper into today. We're going to talk about a couple points of receiving, the importing of attachments and the data that comes with those attachments from the GFP module. We'll talk about exchanging if you bring in new items, inventory, equipment coming from new procurements, how to do that with a much more fluid approach. We'll talk about the role of identification and making sure that when you need to identify that item according to your obligations, contract obligations, then you do it in a way that actually sets the stage for much greater downstream efficiencies. We'll talk about performing inventories with the use of some of these efficient technologies, contract transfers in bulk, which happens a lot, the printing of government paperwork like DD forms, maybe the 1149, and then the reporting to the GFP module. Okay. We're going to move through this pretty quickly. So if you have questions along the way, you can chat away and ask your questions just so you don't forget them. And also so I can, certainly get more pointed in giving you some examples that are meaningful to you. Okay, so here we go. So let's begin with the most simple of a data exchange activity, which relates to automation. You can automate data coming in from your attachment. And what we know about your attachment is what property should be coming into your possession and into your custody. That's the nature of this document being provided through the GFP module. This attachment could have serialized data, could have non-serially managed data. I use serialized and serially managed, sometimes exchanging between the two meaning the same thing, but really what I mean is serially managed items. When you have that data available to you and you start to receive in the items that are coming in against that data set, you can import that data. And you can, by simply selecting the file and mapping it over and allowing that data to flow directly into your government property management system. There's a significant thing happening here. You're taking spreadsheet data, which cannot track and manage transactional history of any particular part or component, and you're bringing it into a relational database that can do that. And the key here is that once you've created a file map that maps from the spreadsheet and all of the column headers in that spreadsheet, the item name, the description, the NSN, cage, part numbers, etc., over to the property management system in the relational database, you've created that map once and you never have to create it again. And so now what you have is the ability to just go in, select the map, select your file, any new contract obligation coming in, and it allows you to quickly import that data and have it start to populate your property management system. And so that data is now ready in which to perform transactions against it and update other systems of record, such as the government property systems. Okay, so again, just a very rudimentary but a real clear example of how do you take the data being provided to you and get it into your system without having to manually enter it, which can take a lot of time and certainly produce errors. Another way to do that upon receiving items in is where you might be using an ERP system to manage your procurements all the way through your receiving and that whole exchange. So it could be any number of ERP systems. You might be on Oracle or SAP, or a lot of companies in the GovCon community use Deltek's CostPoint. So if you have items that have come in through CostPoint, for instance, and they've been receipted in and accepted in as items that are destined to be government property, they could be CAP, whatever the case may be. It could be just generally inventory coming in. Using what we call an API data exchange, that data can get exchanged without any human involvement, without any clicking going on. And this is where it gets set up behind the scenes to exchange data through to a government property system, but with a level of automation and a level of frequency that just sends the data from one system to another. So everything's mapped behind the scenes. Calls are being made from one software application to another. And that's great because now, again, you get the data you need to do your job, and that's coming off of a receiving process. And in this particular case, Deltek CostPoint is the system that's receiving in. And here's the key now. The key is to make sure that you have a two-way exchange between using an API between these two systems, so that the item, part, serial, maybe the location in the inventory data that are changing and moving and being updated are now able to be provided right back to that system of record. And so depending upon which system you might be using, at least you know that your data is always going to be in sync between the two systems, and you have that logical back and forth. No matter which system you go to, you're going to see the same information being referenced. This is key because once you get that identifier in the system, and that's the one key index field that relates to all this asset pedigree, there's no doubt that there are systems that serve you versus ERP systems that might serve the broader organization. So having them in sync is absolutely crucial. Now that brings us to identification. So let's go back in time for a moment here on the identification part. Let's imagine for just a moment that you're the owner and you're running a grocery store back in the 1970s, right? Many of you may or may not know that back in the 1970s, there were no barcodes on anything at the beginning of that decade. So what happened was that the grocery store started to need this marking called a barcode going on the product SKUs of items coming in, because they needed to be more efficient at the point of checkout to know when I'm checking something out, I'm charging the right price for it, and I'm providing it with a level of accuracy so the back room knows to reorder the inventory because we're running out. Seems like it's a simple function at first, but there's work up front in order to achieve that. And that's where it comes to actually this identification requirement to put the use of some kind of auto ID technology on a particular item. So back to the grocery stores, we can't even imagine checking out at a grocery store today without the use of barcode and the efficiency of scanning across the aisles, across the countertops, to ensure that items are being recorded and that you're getting charged the right price. So when you think of identification, think of, yes, you need to put on some upfront auto ID technology, but the downstream benefits to you in managing this equipment are significant. There are a number of different ways to identify an item, again, outlined within your contract obligations. You've got linear barcodes to use. We deal with lots of companies that use just the simple linear barcode to take advantage of downstream performing inventories using mobile devices and such. It may be a requirement for you to put the two-dimensional barcode, or the IUID, as defined by MIL Standard 130, called out from your contract obligation, and the DFARS clause number that relates to MIL Standard 130. Both of those are barcode technologies. Both of them in today's day and age can be read with the same kind of barcode imaging device that can scan in and be able to handle that barcode input in order to, do something against that particular item. as far as record keeping is concerned. Now we also have the benefit of technology called RFID, which RFID, if you're not familiar with it, has a small chip inside that when a scanner reads it, it can actually read using radio waves in a way where it doesn't need line of sight with that particular RFID chip, and it lets you read from much greater distances than barcode does today, more commonly. What happens too is when you start employing RFID, should you choose to go that path, you typically couple RFID with a barcode. So, because in some cases, barcode is best suited for some functions, while RFID is extremely efficient for others. And you're still getting the same level of record keeping accuracy using both. But each represent this identification scheme, this asset tag that has human readable and has machine readable code encoded into it. Then there's the need to apply to the particular different asset types. So thinking about what it is that you're marking, what surface area you have, if there's any curvature to surfaces, how you apply something with a level of permanency that I described before, all of that. But the key here is once you've applied your asset ID, it links it back to that data that you already have in your system. It lets you give a visual identifier to that particular record that you have represented within that system, right? And so now you've got all these things beginning to work together, the data and linked to the physical world and what you're seeing in the physical world. So once we have barcodes on items, let's talk through a barcode inventory, right? You've got your record keeping here. These are just an example of 10 items that might require a barcode because they're serially managed items and they're in a specific location. When I bring and introduce now a mobile computer that has an integrated barcode scanner to it, now what's happening here is that the data that you see in your system is also represented in real time because this is a connected mobile device, what's in the palm of your hand. In the palm of your hand, you can walk into an area, let's say a warehouse, and it can tell you these are the 15 items that are stored in this particular warehouse. 15 assets, 15 inventory items, whatever it happens to be. Do you need to go up and count SKU, count against a SKU number, or are you just scanning a unique identifier of some kind that represents that one serially managed item? What's happening though is this now gives you in the palm of your hand the power in which to introduce real-time reconciliation at the point of that activity. You don't have to take a spreadsheet and go enter it and then try and update the system of record or manually process something on a clipboard and go back and rekey it. What happens is when you start scanning it, it knows, the system knows are the 15 items in that location. And as you scan them, you're now reconciling. It tells you, okay, check, 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 green light against 14 of these 15 items. But wait a second, I caught 3 more items that should have been in another location. But the good news is I actually just identified them at the moment in time. So I might have 17 items now. 3 of them were supposed to be in another location. Either I can move them back there or I can go ahead and just update the location on those other 3 and we're good to go. Also note that I said 3 was the deviation there, and one of them, 14 was only captured out of 15. One of them that should have been in this location is missing, and it'll tell me on the spot. So now I can go back and reconcile and update to know, that I need to go track down that item and resolve that issue. And as you can see, every time a barcode scan takes place, an inventory date and time gets automatically updated, just all by the click of a barcode scan. Huge, huge efficiencies and the ability to eliminate a lot of manual data entry. Now, when these different lifecycle events are captured too, what can happen in a relational database, again, is now you can capture a whole auditable history of activity that's taken place. We've got creation of the record. We've got the how items have been edited in that record. The physical movements of those items are being tracked when they're inventoried, for instance. Who did it? Who within the system that was logged in at that time with a named user in the system performed that function? When was it done? Transactions going back to 2018 in this particular case. And location changes with more descriptions, inventory dates, more detail that gives you a very good perspective, auditable perspective that cannot be edited or modified as to what's going on or what happened with that particular part or component. Now let's introduce RFID into this same scenario. We've got the same 10 items or so. Now take the mobile computer and simply snap it in to a handheld RFID sled. This sled pairs directly with the mobile, so now you can perform all of the functions you did on the mobile, but now with a much more efficient RFID scan, should you want to choose that direction because of the amount of RFID or inventory that needs to be performed that RFID can let you achieve in a much faster time frame. Again, all of the same functions. It'll find what it's looking for. It'll identify anything that was missing. It'll let you capture more items and know if something was there that maybe shouldn't have been there. In this particular case now, remember, we are reading without line of sight to these RFID tags. We see a lot of organizations that are going in, they're tracking IT equipment that might be at somebody's workstation. They have to bend down, get underneath desks, crawl around to find where that asset ID tag is. It's hard to visually see it sometimes, so you have to really get in to see it. This RFID reading will read around the back of computers or sometimes even inside containers that could be closed as long as they're non-metallic. And it lets you capture and update that information. So now you have all of that information and you're actually managing the exceptions, not managing the inventory should already be there, because that will instantly appear to you, that inventory that should already be there. You're managing now the exceptions. The other great thing of RFID is that it is autonomous reading, where you can hang readers in at key choke points, we call them, egresses like doorways, in and out of facilities or inside facilities that let you track RFID tagged assets between locations or in a warehouse from one zone to another or from one engineering lab to another, again, without any human involvement. Each of these orange two-way arrows really represent a two-way exchange between when an item has passed underneath it, that identifies the date and time that happened, and exactly the direction it was moving. Was it coming into the building or was it going back out of the building? So you get really smart about thinking about, okay, I want to know whatever's coming in and out of the warehouse real time. Same true of the production room, and maybe some key office areas or laboratories. So I know where things are going. So I just don't need to flood my entire area with just many of these different gateway readers. I can strategically position them and really hone in on the area. When I know it's past a certain points, I can then go and now use my mobile computer in which to find something far more efficiently and with much less time than ever before. Dock doors, you might see something that might not be an overhead reader, but might be something that could be more of like a portal reader, so that as items are coming and going from shipping or receiving docks, they actually are being read and tracked in real time, whatever truck they might be going on. There's just many ways in which to assure that when a shipment goes out the door or something's received in, you now identified it, and identified it in really an autonomous way that's zero human involvement. There's also the role of these government systems. So here's another form of where automation can take place, right? The PI system, we know it, the GFP module, the wide area workflow, the IUID registry, PCARs, all of these are systems that want your data for some reason. Some of them are transactional to make sure that any new items you send that you get paid for and the acknowledgement of receipt, or if you've got GFP that's coming in and you want to receive it in, now you want to, provide that acknowledgement of the receipt and of the item that had come in. We've gone through a lot of these attachment references, shipments and receipt transactions, updates and dispositions. Here's the key. We all know we can log into the PI system and through the web interface, but exchanging data through the web portal is only one option. Direct exchange is far more efficient. If you have the data in your system, why do you need to swivel chair over and go ahead and type it into a government system now? Just add data redundancy and a lot of possible error to it. So this is really where this GEX exchange comes in. And when you go to report this data, you should be reporting it one time through GEX to these systems. So how does this look? When you have a government property management system, you can select those 10 items. We'll use this 10 items again. What happens is when you select and go to register with a single click, all those items, not logging into the website, but right from your system, the system should be able to tell you all of the areas that you need to resolve before that data gets sent up to the GFP module. That's going to save you from having to submit something, getting rejections, and then having to correct all those rejections, which is a lot of data resolution back and forth, very time consuming. What we see here is that if you drill into any one of these assets or pieces of government property, you can actually see specifically what needs to get resolved. Maybe there's some custody contract detail that's missing. Obviously there's a lot of custody contract detail missing. There's a UID that's missing. Those things need to get resolved before you can confidently hit submit and know that it's going to go through to the registry. Otherwise, it would just simply get rejected. Now, in the better, happier path to this, ultimately what we see is that the reporting to the module will give you an IUID registry confirmed. It'll come right back and tell you, yeah, good to go. That was all successful registration. And you can see how many records were updated in that one submission. And so you get a positive confirmation, not only in your dashboard, but also registration results via email. So a lot more peace of mind in knowing that it made it to where it needed to go. We also see the need for a lot of bulk contract transfers. So you can take any number of records and you can map that over to a new contract obligation. By simply going in and bulk selecting all of the different items, you can then map it over to a new contract, however much contract pedigree you need to add in there, and with one click, everything gets migrated over to a new contract, keeping your records up to date with far more efficiency. Wouldn't be a good government process unless there was paperwork. So this allows you to automate your DD forms, right? And so if you have the data there in your system and you've got a shipment that represents some information about what might be going back to the government, for instance, you can select that shipment number and have all of that create with a single click the different line items that represent what invoice, requisition invoice or shipping documentation needs to go back. DD 1149s, if they're end items going out for new acquisition, they're DD 250s, DD 1348s. There's so many different forms that can automatically be populated when you know that you have the data there, and it can automate that for you, so you don't have to re-enter or have somebody re-enter this information. So why do we automate? We've given you lots of different examples of why to automate, but really it's about exchanging data that's coming from and going to government systems or ERP systems that can be leveraged in a meaningful way that keeps the accuracy and the data integrity to wherever they need to go next, and all systems are in sync. I know that feels, like it might be a tall order if you're manually entering today, but there is a better future in which keeping these records up to date and keeping them in sync. Knowing that you can connect the physical world of what you have and where it is to your record keeping world is the use of auto ID. To set that up at the beginning of the identification stage so that downstream you can perform inventory, you can find assets, you can track assets with much more efficiency than you'd ever had done using a manual process. With RFID, there's been studies that show that you can save up to 30 times it's a 30 times savings of using RFID over manual processing. So imagine you had a warehouse that you were counting inventory and it took a month to count inventory. With RFID, you can do that inventorying within a day or two. It's really that profound when implemented correctly. You can create paperwork, automating the paperwork, such as the DD forms we showed you. And you can exchange data directly through to government systems. When you know you've got clean data in your system and you want a single click without having to go into that portal, you can do so, and that will allow you to get that data exchanged. And by the way, we all know that those systems are going to continue to grow, right? And the need for that data is going to continue to grow, particularly under the scrutiny of fire and meeting this clean audit obligation. But really, it's about data accuracy. It's about making sure that you're reducing errors and you're saving your time in performing these government property functions, and having a government property management system that can actually work for you in helping to achieve those goals. So I want to thank everybody for being part of this today, and just a couple of notables. One is I can take some questions. Happy to, and the other thing to just mention, as you can see here, there is another session that's going to be coming up. I know Scott's going to mention one in the month of March here. I'm looking a little bit beyond, where A to B and Baker Tilly, Alex Michelson, and I are teaming up to talk both about contract obligations and how that affects your process and procedures, and how technology dovetails into that discussion as well. And from Baker Tilly's perspective, as you've heard, I'm sure Alex talked before, he does a great job of really getting into the details of processes and outcomes and everything that you need to be considering. And how that matches up with technology is what this session is about. You can actually sign up today in case you're interested in doing so. You could simply take your phone and you can scan this 2D barcode, this QR code, and it'll take you to the registration page, and you just fill out your registration info. And this is something that NPMA will be hosting on April 27th at 2 p.m. Eastern.
Thank you, Peter. We do have questions.
Okay.
All right. So the first one is, how is the property linked being UC and cost point?
How is the property being linked from?
Yeah, how is the property linked being UC and cost point? Does that?
If I think I understand that question correctly, I'm going to kind of infer the connection between cost point and coming to the product's UC Web, which is the A to B tracking platform. It comes in via the fixed asset module in cost point that links over to the A to B platform. And then the other way, which is currently being worked on, soon to be released here in the upcoming second calendar quarter of this year, is coming in through CostPoint's inventory module. So today it's fixed assets, and within the next quarter it will be through the inventory module alike.
Okay.
I think that answers that question.
Okay. Next question. Why use RFID and something else, meaning like IUID and RFID? Why is it not a duplication of efforts?
Oh, good question. So IUID has become the standard for DoD's approach to managing serially managed items. Your obligation by contract is that if it says do an IUID, use MIL Standard 130, you must do IUID. You must put IUIDs on items. Now, that's the minimum threshold. If RFID, from your perspective, benefits you in tracking, let's say it's a repair operation and you wanted to RFID tags at the beginning of the process and you wanted to track things through WIP or something, or improve your efficiency on doing your own inventory, you can actually embed an RFID chip in there, in that IUID tag. So it can do both. But IUID is really a barcode standard that's mandated, if you will, where, assuming your contract calls it, and while RFID can couple with it just to make your life easier on top of it. So it won't be, although it feels like redundant technologies, both kind of have different benefits to how you might use them. And I will say that, it kind of gets me thinking about, there are some use cases or procedures, let's call them, that use one technology better than the other. And so let's just say you're putting things away in a warehouse, right? And you've got 20 items that you've got a pallet jack that you're moving down and you're putting them on shelves. Barcode really is a good technology to scan one-to-one and put away on a shelf location and be updating it with a mobile computer. Now, if you have an RFID tag on those same items and you have 2,000 more items in the warehouse and they're all RFID tagged, your inventory is going to be so much more efficient with using RFID, because you'll be able to do it in a fraction of the time of the one-to-one relationship that you get with barcode versus RFID. So sometimes it's a contract thing, why you do barcode versus RFID. Sometimes it's more of a practical, how does it support my operation? It's kind of a complex question that you may not have, known that you were asking, but if you want to get, whoever's asking, if you want to get deeper into the nuances of that answer, there's plenty of people at A to B or myself that can help you along on that path.
Okay. And another question, who determines what is serially managed? Is that the customer?
So that's a good question. That's part of, what I'll call policy and contract obligations. I'm not probably the best to answer. My understanding is that there certainly are categories of serially managed assets, but I believe it's the customer really that's going to dictate, your customer and your contract are going to dictate what are serially managed items that you need to track. Yes, is the answer to that.
Next question. Do you see more grants requiring RFID in the future? Also, are there any grants that may be available for moving to RFID?
We're seeing RFID being used both on the GovCon side, the contractor side, and we're seeing it being used inside the federal government, both on the civilian side, and the military side of the federal government. There's no doubt that RFID is kind of making its way into the normal course of doing business now than it has a year ago, 2 years ago. and more. It's now it's much more affordable than it was 5 years ago or even 3 years ago now. So more organizations are taking advantage of it. I do see it on occasion being written into contracts. It's tough to know, how that's going to continue to grow. But I would say, knowing that it's become a very appealing technology because it's much more practical and affordable than ever before, you will see more of it. I would always advocate, based on our experience in working with defense contractors or just federal government contractors, is that we see some number of them saying, yeah, this will help you, customer. And so as such, here's a technology, we want to implement it, and we also want it to be covered as an expense, as an expense, essentially covered under the contract. There's no doubt in my mind that that's a position that we've seen contractors take and do successfully. So if that was kind of where that question was leading, I certainly think customer-funded technology investments are a good place to start.
Great. Another question. What about labs that do not want miscellaneous radio frequency within them?
So that's a good question. Yeah. Usually those labs are a higher level of security of some kind, a secure environment of sorts. What we see happening there with labs like that is that RF, we have not seen a lot of success using RFID inside the lab, meaning that you can walk in with a reader that's emitting RFID signal. We have not seen a lot of success with at this point. However, these tags, if you choose to use RFID, do not emit unless there's a radio signal trying to communicate with it. So what that means is that they're dormant tags. They don't poll, they're not looking for anything actively. And so they can reside inside a secure environment. And what we've seen happen now is that as these egresses, doorways, go in and out of secure environments, we see customers that are hanging RFID readers outside these secure areas where you can't emit RF. Or it could be a manufacturing environment too, I suppose. But anyway, you hang them outside these areas so that as items move out of the area or into the area, they're being scanned outside, they're being recorded as either going in or going out, so you know the last known location as to when it was read and when it was recognized. So that's our recommendation number one on the RF transmission issue. The second thing is, if you just wanted to stick with barcode, at A2B, we've been working to solve this problem, and we did solve this problem. There's a mobile barcode reader that can be used inside these environments that don't emit any RF signal whatsoever, and just have a barcode scanner on it, so you can walk in and capture all the barcode reads to perform inventory that you need, and then walk back out, cradle it up outside the area to a laptop or desktop computer, and then update the records automatically that way. There's a couple ways to solve that one.
All right, we've got 2 minutes left and we still have a bunch of questions. So do you want to go a little longer, or do you want to send the questions to you and you reply to the individuals via email?
Yeah, let's do it that way, Lisa.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, good deal. So we'll do one more quick one that's kind of a follow-up to what you just said. Do any of the RFID transmissions interfere with the actual performance of equipment?
That's a nuanced question too. It's a good one. Understand with RFID that the FCC designates a frequency range in which to use this RF signal. And so it's an ultra high frequency. There is a very dedicated range. It's designed to be used in and amongst other kinds of RF sensitive equipment. I haven't come across anything where there's been an impediment of a UHF against equipment. But I would always say that if you have a particularly sensitive laboratory, it might be space related, it might be civilian or military, I don't know, whatever it is, let us know what that equipment is that would cause concern. And I'm almost certain that we can, give you the right answer as to whether or not it would interfere. But there is a little bit of due diligence up front, I'd say you should do if that's a question in your mind.
Okay, we'll stop it there. I'm going to turn it back over to Scott. Thank you, Peter. And just for everybody listening, I will email these questions to Peter so that he can reply to you personally. So.
Great.
All
Thanks,
right.
Lisa.
Well, thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Peter, for taking the time to put your presentation together and present to us today. There's a ton of questions, I guess, heading your way, so this was a really interesting topic, and again, thank you for your time. And please, if you are interested in checking out the MPMA Spotlight webinar that Peter will be putting on in April, please go ahead and either scan the QR code here or visit the MPMA calendar, and I'm sure the event is posted there as well, and register. With that, we are at time. I would like to remind everyone that we do have another presentation coming up next week as part of our Asset Management Awareness Month schedule of presentations. It'll be a presentation centered upon electric vehicles and will be presented by Eric Brown, who works over with Homeland Security. So please do consider attending that presentation. But with that, have a great rest of your day and wonderful rest of your week, and I will see you at the next webinar. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you, Scott. And just so everybody knows, this presentation will be available at npma.org. But if you'd also like a copy emailed to you, just email conferences@npma.org and we will get that to you. Thanks again, Peter.
You're welcome, Lisa. Thanks, Scott. Take care.